Darn it. Hello, welcome to our Friday webinar. See, we got Dr. Steffi Lamb with us today. Hey,
Hello.
Dr. Hi. um, so we're gonna do California condors today, right?
Yep.
This is gonna be very fun. I actually gosh, years ago, when they were building that, like at the San Diego facility, like to see the California condors there, like the wildlife park there.
Oh yeah, the ones on display out there.
Yeah, yeah,
Nice.
yeah, very nice. My favorite, I just want to wait for people to log in, but then they had the viral video of when they had the ones that were released, they landed on someone's patio and they're
Oh
so big and bulky and they just knocked everything down.
yeah. That
That was
person
gorgeous.
who has like 11 of them or something like that on their patio.
Yeah. Like you walk out, you're like, whoa. Um, that would be, I mean, you can't be mad about that because you got these, you know, yeah, I mean, I think you'd almost if you had the opportunity for them to wreak havoc on your patio, you'd go for it, right?
Right.
So, okay, let's see where everyone's logging in from. So I love that, and I hope everyone had a safe and a safe Halloween with their the flock. Did you have any like chocolate eating clients that came in today?
No, not today, which is good. So,
Okay.
thankfully, since we just do exotics, we don't have that as big of a problem as all of our dog veterinarians do.
It seems more like a dog thing, right? Not a cat, not a bird, not a snake, but I was curious, like, is it usually the day after if they did eat a lot of chocolate, or is it like 2 days after? Like just wondering if
If they get like a problem, it's usually pretty quick. Yeah,
is
it's
it
gonna
quick?
be like the day, even within a few hours, you could potentially be having a problem.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
And
Um,
it depends on like what they get into, like how high the chocolate content actually is.
yeah.
Uh, because if it's pretty low actual chocolate, like if it's more milk chocolate, then they have to eat a whole lot more for it to actually be a toxicity. And sometimes it's more the sugar that is just upsetting to the GI tract than anything.
Okay. So if it's Tootsie Roll, because that's not real chocolate.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. So we got people from, yeah, I love this. We got people from Wild Lady Liberty Wildlife Center in Phoenix. That's kind of near you.
That
That's
is.
yeah, there we go. So okay, so I know you have I love your PowerPoints, so let's get this started because I'm sure you've got a lot of great information to share with us. So
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of a different topic this time around. I know normally we really focus a lot on our pet birds, and we've talked a little bit about wildlife, but it's always kind of been in relation to pet birds. So this time around, we're going to talk a little bit, go out a little bit on a branch here, and we're going to talk more specifically about wildlife. And in the past, we've also done some species spotlights where I've spoken about different parrot species that I've gotten to see in the wild and just highlighted their unique things about them. So we're doing a species spotlight again, but this one is on the California condor. Definitely not a pet that anybody is going to have in their home. But I hope people enjoy it because it is an interesting topic. And specifically, we're going to talk about avian flu. We have talked about that a little bit in the past in previous webinars that we've done where we've talked about, the potential problems that could come about from avian flu if it were to affect our pet birds. So we're going to talk about specifically how it affected the California condor. Let me advance my slide. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start off with just some basic information about the California condor. If anybody who's on isn't too familiar with the species, they are the largest flying land bird in North America and can have up to a 9-foot wingspan. This is a picture of one of them. This is a juvenile. When they're younger, they have more of a black coloring to their head, and as they mature, they actually get more pink as time goes on. They're pretty large birds, weighing anywhere between 16 to 24 pounds, which that is a large bird. I don't think I've ever gotten to work with one that's 24 pounds. The reality is when I'm getting to work with them, because I'm very lucky, I do get to work with this species. The ones I'm working with are usually ill, coming into the facility where I volunteer. And when they're ill, they're often a little bit underweight. So I don't think I've ever seen one that's 24 pounds, but that's what's reported. They do normally feed on large mammal carcasses. They are scavengers. They're, one of the largest vultures out there. And so they're really important in our ecosystem because they are scavenging on dead things and cleaning up the environment for us. So they amazingly can hold up to about 3 pounds of food in their crops, which is just insane. If you or I ate 3 pounds of food in one sitting, I mean, I don't know that I'd be able to move. I don't think I could even do that. I don't think it'd be possible. So it's, really truly amazing how much they can consume. But, birds are unique and they are different from us, as we've talked about in previous lectures. Going over anatomy with them, they have their crop, which is sort of this outpouching of the esophagus, where they store food before it goes down into the lower portions of the stomach, the proventriculus and the ventriculus. And so they really, that portion is really quite distensible. If we look at the picture of the condor here, let me see if my mouse works, there it is. It just kind of sits right here at that base of the neck. And that's really why they're able to take in so much food, because they just fill that crop up really, really quite a bit. And for all of our pet bird owners out there, I know that you guys have seen in your own pet birds when your bird has had a really big meal, that sometimes they look really kind of like fat at the top of their chest, and that's because they've just really expanded that crop with food before it goes down into the GI tract. The other thing that's really interesting about them, they usually feed like every 2 to 3 days, but they can survive even more than 2 weeks without feeding, because they just can, take in so much food and then just be able to survive for long periods. But these guys, because they are scavengers, it's not necessarily a guarantee that there's going to be food out there every day for them to find to be scavenging on. So they certainly have to be opportunistic and adaptable and able to go for a period without food and do okay. So these birds evolved during the late Pleistocene epoch, and we're in the fossil record actually in the Grand Canyon, which is where these birds who we're talking about today are, more than 43,000 years ago. So they've been in the Americas for quite some time. But due to various factors, their numbers actually dwindled to only 22 individuals remaining in the wild in the 1980s. So these guys really came extremely close to extinction. And so there was a lot of talks about what people were going to do to try to help the species. And in 1987, biologists did go out there and capture the remaining wild individuals and place them in captive breeding programs in an attempt to try to save the species. They wanted to breed them, to re-release them into the wild, to try to increase those numbers back to what they were originally, or just increase them from this horrible only 22 individuals at its worst. And so they started releasing birds about 5 years later in 1992 with varying levels of success. There's been many challenges along the way, but currently there's approximately 500 individuals of California Condor. So that is definitely an improvement from 22. Just real quickly with this picture here, just to show this bird here and this bird here with these darker heads, these are the younger individuals. And this one right here is an adult with that fully pink head. So that's how you can tell adult versus young. Okay, so with what we specifically wanted to go over today, really, when we first started encountering this problem, we did not really know what we were dealing with. In March of 2023, the California condors in the Grand Canyon started to act a little odd. And let me back up just a moment. Of those like 500 individuals that are out there, or that are, alive in the world today. Not all of those individuals are out in the wild. Some of those individuals are in captivity, whether they're in, captive breeding programs or in like a zoo situation. There's only a subset of the 500 that are wild, and they are in a few different locations. They're in Arizona in the Grand Canyon area and go up into Utah. There are a couple of locations throughout the state of California. There's also some up in Oregon, and then also down in Baja, California. So, these birds have been released in a few strategic locations along the, western half of North America to try to get them into good places that they are likely to survive. But in the Grand Canyon population, they started acting a little off in March of 2023. The birds were just kind of sitting around more. They weren't really moving and not engaging in normal activities. And sadly, some birds actually started dying. And, it's nature, right? So there is going to be some death in nature, and there's already some problems that the condors have to deal with frequently, which we're going to talk more about at the end. And so initially nobody knew exactly what was going on, but there was an increased incidence of birds that were not doing well. So this is an individual here who works with the California Condors, who actually is one individual who went out and captured one of the ill individuals to bring it in for it to be assessed. So when the individuals who were ill were able to be captured and brought in, they were showing a sort of vague signs. Some of them were just kind of thin, a little bit under body condition. Some had what's called corneal edema. And this is a picture of the very first one that we dealt with. And you can see her eyeball here. Her nose is kind of like over here. It's just a up close picture of her eye. And you can see how half of the eye has sort of this like hazy appearance to it. That is corneal edema. So there's actually like fluid developing in the cornea and giving it that sort of hazy appearance. The birds were also, unfortunately, some of them were suffering from seizure activity and then also having weakness. So because again, this is March of 2023, and we knew that in the US is probably having a problem with high pathogenic avian influenza, and we start to see some of these very vague, non-specific signs, we started to worry, like, could this potentially be high pathogenic avian influenza? Is this virus that we're really hoping is not, we're hoping it's not going to hit the condors, did it get into the condors? Let's start some testing and see what we can find. So various tests were done, one of which was testing for high pathogenic avian influenza. And when they were tested for high pathogenic avian influenza, unfortunately, it was found that, yes, they were positive for high pathogenic avian influenza. So over the course of this outbreak, there unfortunately were a total of about 21 California condors that ended up passing away from high pathogenic avian influenza. And this is a substantial amount of the population. I don't remember the exact numbers, but roughly there was about 120 individuals in the like northern Arizona, southern Utah population, because the Grand Canyon is kind of like right at the edge of northern Arizona. If anybody's unfamiliar with locations of the Grand Canyon in Arizona, it's like northern border. And so these birds who are in the Grand Canyon do actually go up to Utah, and they kind of just go back and forth. And so that population of birds was about 120 individuals, and they lost 21. I mean, that's a substantial amount of birds to lose from your population, especially when it's an endangered species. There are about 8 breeding pairs that were impacted. And those breeding pairs are so important because, again, this is an endangered species. This is a species that we're trying to get their numbers up in the wild. And it's really important to have breeding pairs out there that are naturally breeding and reproducing and making new baby condors. And with that many breeding pairs impacted, that's pretty significant. It's a big, problem for that population of birds. And from that, those breeding pairs, 13 of them passed away, which again, that's substantial. Now, I'm a volunteer at Liberty Wildlife, so I'm excited some people are on today from Liberty Wildlife. And as a volunteer there, that's where I've had the opportunity to work with the California Condors. And we provide care to the birds in the Arizona flock. And so they had sent some of the birds down to us to care for them during this time because, you know, these birds were ill and we're trying to save every individual that we can. Because every individual matters when you're an endangered species. Every individual matters anyways, of course, but when it's an endangered species, the stakes are pretty high. So these birds were coming into the facility. And this is just another picture of another condor. This is actually still the first one as well, showing that edema, but then also really how red the white portion of the eye, the sclera, is. So just indication of something is, you know, causing some systemic inflammation in this individual. So just to talk a little bit more though about influenza, because I want to just make sure everybody knows what influenza is before we get into more of what happened. What influenza is, we call it H5N1 avian influenza or high pathogenic avian influenza. And sometimes it's a question, if you're not in the medical profession, what the heck is H5 and N1? Like, what do those things actually mean? Because you'll hear different things. You'll hear like, oh, this avian influenza is H1 or, you know, H2N3 or something like that. They have this H and this N. So what those actually are is the individual influenza virus. Like if an influenza virus comes into a population, that virus itself, it has these surface proteins on them, and we name those surface proteins. There's hemagglutinin protein and neuraminidase protein that's on the surface of that virus, and there's different numbers of hemagglutinins and there's different numbers of neuraminidase. And the way that the viral particles sort of combine together, you're going to have one type of hemagglutinin and one type of neuraminidase. And so there's I think about 18 at this point of the H proteins and about I think 11 of the N proteins. I might be slightly off on that. I have read a couple of variable things. But basically you're going to get one H, you're going to get one N, and then a combination of how that H and N protein are gives you your name. So this specific one we're talking about is H5. They had the, you know, hemagglutinin number 5, I guess, and neuraminidase number 1 to make H5N1. But that's important because that actually dictates how pathogenic the virus actually is. There's low pathogenic viruses, and those are going to cause mild disease, maybe even asymptomatic disease. You could potentially have a bird that has avian influenza and doesn't have any signs from it, to maybe just some respiratory signs, you know, nasal discharge, ocular discharge, little bit of respiratory distress. And then there's really high pathogenic ones, and those are ones that are going to cause more moderate to severe disease and sometimes up to 100% mortality. The ones that are more problematic and have the potential to be high rates of mortality and almost be up to 100% mortality are the H5 and the H7 varieties. Those are the ones that are the most pathogenic. H1 is also pretty pathogenic too, but H5 and H7 are really big problems. And it's also important to note that these are big problems specific to chickens. So when we say it's high pathogenic or low pathogenic, even though like we worry about that and we go, oh my God, high pathogenic means it's high pathogenic for everybody. Actually, that's not the case. High pathogenic means it's high pathogenic for the chicken. And for everybody else, we don't know. Like maybe H5N1 is going to be a real big problem if it gets into a condor or it gets into a parrot. We know it's really bad when it gets into a chicken. In a chicken, it can have 100% mortality, but maybe it doesn't have that high rate of mortality as it does in a chicken compared to other species. There's just a lot of information that we don't actually know. We worry that it's going to be a high problem in other species, but high pathogenic is specific to the chicken. So that's why there's a picture of a chicken here. All right. So what happened with those condors that came into the facility? Well, during that time, during that outbreak, we had actually 9 condors coming into the facility during that period when influenza was a problem. And 8 of those individuals were positive for high pathogenic influenza. We treated them while they were in the hospital with us. And generally what we were doing was a lot of supportive care. We were doing things like fluids, B vitamins. Some of them, like we were checking for other things, like we were looking for other types of infection. We're looking for lead toxicities, copper toxicities, other issues that could potentially be problematic, and treating those things. But really it was just a lot of supportive care for these guys. Unfortunately, 4 of those individuals passed away. So of the 8 individuals that came into the facility for us to treat, to try to care for them, only half of them survived. But we got half of them to survive. So, you know, it's on the one hand very sad because we had a 50% mortality of the individuals coming into the office. But we had 50% that survived. So, you know, it's, I guess, is your glass half empty or half full? How do you want to look at that? It is certainly better than how it affects the chickens, it seems. But again, this is an endangered species. There's only so many out there. And so to have, you know, a mortality rate like that was pretty hard to watch, especially when you're trying so hard to help these individuals to get them to survive and pull through. But the reality is, you know, we aren't able to save everything that comes to us. And it's a hard reality to deal with. But it is what it is. We just try our best. Now, as I mentioned, there were 9 condors that came into the facility during this time, but I only talked about 8 of them having influenza. So what about condor number 9 that came in during this outbreak? So this was condor number 9. It was an egg. So one of the female birds that had come into the facility, before she had come into the facility, before she had gotten sick from high pathogenic influenza, she got sick. Well, before she got sick, she had laid an egg. She got sick. She was captured, brought into captivity, and she fought pretty hard while she was with us. She, honestly, of all the birds that passed away, she was the one that survived the longest. But she did pass while she was with us, because even though she was fighting hard, the virus did win in the end. So it was really sad, you know, when she passed, but we didn't actually know she had an egg out there. Her mate was actually still out there in the wild, and he was still incubating that egg. Now, condors are really great parents, and that dad was very dedicated to sitting on that egg and incubating that egg. And if you remember at the beginning how I said they can go for several weeks without eating, well, that's what he was choosing to do. He was choosing to sit on that egg and incubate that egg, and not really taking care of himself. He wasn't really leaving to get food, water, you know, he was really focused on taking care of that egg. He was waiting for his mate to come back, but she wasn't coming back. So the individuals who care for the condors, because this population, again, since it's endangered, it is heavily monitored, and the Arizona and Utah population is monitored by the Peregrine Fund, and they do a great job of monitoring them. And so they were watching the dad, and they made the decision that, you know, we lost the mom from avian influenza. We don't know what's going to happen with the dad. Does he have influenza? Is he not going to leave this egg, and is he going to starve to death? What's going to happen? Are we going to lose another bird when we're already losing so many? So what they decided to do was they decided to go down into the nest when he had left for a moment. They got to the nest and they actually took the egg. And they took the egg so that he would be able to decide to leave. Because if the egg was no longer there in the nest, he would make the decision to go and take care of himself. So they took the egg and brought the egg into Liberty Wildlife for us to care for the egg. Now, you know, with that egg, and this is something where I'm less involved in this area. This is for sure more the Liberty Wildlife folks. I'm just the vet who gets to do the cool thing, like hold the egg and look at it. But really, it is the Liberty Wildlife rehabilitators who are the ones who are caring for that egg. And while they were, you know, the egg came into their care, you know, and we candled it. And so this picture where I'm holding it in my hands is when we were candling it, like right before we were candling it, to kind of see, is this egg viable? And it looked like it was viable, you know. And so it was incubated just like other eggs that will come into the facility. And after a little over a week, the egg started to pip. So this is the picture of the egg, and you can see at the bottom here how it's starting to crack. That's because that little baby inside of that egg was being very well incubated and very well cared for, initially by her father, and then at the thankfully very able hands of Liberty Wildlife folks. And she started to actually break out of that egg. Now, when she was coming through that egg, she was a little bit malpositioned. So we did have to assist with helping her out of the egg. And so here she is, the day that she was being assisted out of the egg. So you can see in this first picture here, we just kind of had gently removed some of the egg. And you can see in this central photo, I have gloves on, you know, because we don't also know the status of avian influenza in this tiny little bird. We really didn't think that it had influenza. The egg like shell had been swabbed to see if there was any influenza, and that had come back negative. It really shouldn't be transmitting in the egg, but we really don't know, you know, like, again, we're talking about a totally different species than the typical species that this is in, right? So like, how is it going to behave in this species? It shouldn't be passing in the egg, but like, what if it did? So we're having to be handling very, very carefully. And of course, for the safety of the little baby too, like we don't want anything on my hands that could potentially transmit to that baby. So I'm using little hemostats to break off little pieces of the egg, and you can kind of see little eggshells, fragments in the hemostats there. But if you look at this photo here, that's her little beak that's actually popping out of the egg right there as well. And then as we get more of that shell removed, you can see her little head popping out of the egg. And so we got her completely out there. That's her little like umbilical sort of area where the yolk sac is attached to, and I'm kind of wiping it off from her. And you can see her like little tiny eyeball that is barely even open, but it's just open the tiniest little bit. And look at her cute little fat little legs. Definitely a tiny little dinosaur, but also look at how gigantic this tiny dinosaur is, you know. For anybody who's watching that's hatched out any other species of bird, you know, if you're hatching out macaws from eggs, or I've hatched out little finches before, you know, they're usually tiny little things, and this thing was huge. And I have to say, handling the egg and breaking things out, I'm sure most people who are on this webinar have probably seen Jurassic Park, and you know, the first Jurassic Park where the raptor is coming out of the egg and they're helping it. That's what it felt like. So helping this dinosaur come out of this egg, this cute little tiny thing. And just a few more photos. So this is one of the other doctors that is at Liberty Wildlife. This is Dr. Go, and she was just using a little iodine to apply to that umbilical area. Here she was just kind of standing like first time on her own, and I'm making a really ugly face, but that's like an ugly happy face, you know. And because, you know, this was very emotional for all of us who were involved. We had just been through a pretty bad time. You know, the Peregrine Fund, people who care for these birds and are monitoring them out in the wild. You know, the facility and staff at Liberty Wildlife who are caring for all these individuals who are coming in sick. Nobody really knows at the time, like, how is this going to turn out? How are all these birds going to do? And so, you know, with several of them dying, and then to have this little baby that was able to survive despite all of, you know, everything that was going on, it was thankfully a little bit of a reprieve of something happy going on during this really, really difficult time. So, and then again, you can kind of see her little face and her cute little bald head and her just little sort of fluffy stick-like feathers that she has. Okay, so when the condors are born, so like every condor has a number that's associated with it. And once the new one's born, then they get their number. And so her number was, or is, 1221. So that she is, since like the program started, she's the 1,221st individual, I guess. So But, you know, most of the condors, they just go by their numbers, because they try to remain impartial. You know, the biologists, we can all get attached, but they try to remain a little impartial, you know, and not name them so much. But this little girl was very special to everybody who was involved with her. And so she was given the name Malagra, and that was, it means miracle, because she was our little miracle baby that had hatched during, again, this sort of difficult time. Now, she spent the next week after hatching just growing and eating. So she stayed in a little incubator. She was being hand fed, but she needed to go somewhere else, right? Because this bird needs to get back into the wild. This is not a bird that we're going to be keeping in captivity. The goal of this bird is to be free. And so at Liberty Wildlife, though there are a couple of condors that live there that are condors that have some permanent injury, so they can't be re-released. Those individuals are not parents. They're not used to fostering babies. So we needed to get this baby somewhere where she could have an appropriate foster parent to care for her. So a lot of people were involved with this when she hatched out of where are we going to send this baby. And there's the Peregrine Fund has their breeding facility up in Idaho. There's also the breeding facilities at like the San Diego Zoo, the LA Zoo, that are breeding these birds. And so it's a lot of talk going on amongst all the different facilities. Where is this baby going to go? Where can we get her to? Because remember, there's a high pathogenic avian influenza outbreak going on. And the whole reason this bird is in captivity is because its mother died from high pathogenic avian influenza. So getting a bird to cross state lines to go somewhere else during an influenza outbreak is not a simple thing to do. We can't just go, okay, let's just drive it over to California, and nobody's going to care. It's going to be totally fine. Like, no, that's not the case. Like, this is a big deal. And I'm sure everybody who's on here has heard about this virus in the news over the last couple of years. You know, this virus has been persisting and being a problem. It's affecting, the poultry industry substantially. Egg prices have definitely fluctuated and gone up because of this virus. Like, tons of poultry have had to be poultry facilities have had to be decontaminated, euthanizing birds, and starting over because of this virus. So like, this is a huge, huge deal. And it's a huge like economic importance too, because of the poultry industry. So it took a lot of efforts to get this bird where she needed to go. We had to do some tests on her to make sure that she, in fact, was not carrying high pathogenic avian influenza. Again, when she came into the facility, we swabbed the egg to see if the egg was positive, and it wasn't. But then we needed to swab her. So this is me in one of those, I forget the name of that suit, like Gimli suit or something like that. I'm probably saying that totally wrong. But this like suit where I'm a tree. So that the bird doesn't know like who I am. And I had done my physical exam, and this is me like swabbing her little bottom to test her for high pathogenic avian influenza. And her test thankfully came back negative. We had gotten stuff accepted by different regulating bodies and everything to make a decision of where she was going to go. So ultimately, but everybody had decided that little Malagra was going to go to Boise, Idaho, which is where the Peregrine Fund has their breeding facility for the California condors. But in order to get her there, we had to fly her there. Like, that was part of it. They wanted her to be flown there. So we had to get the help of a private pilot to fly her to up to Idaho. And this is just, I was in the back seat here. And here's the pilots that we had in this very tiny little plane that we were in to take her up to Idaho. So it was a 6-seater plane, but there was 4 of us in there. I've never been in a plane so tiny. I don't know how you would call this a 6-seater plane, but I don't know anything about planes. So I'm in the back here, and what I have right here is actually her. She's inside of a little tote, a little sterilite tote. And this is the plane that we were actually on. So this is us actually flying out of Sky Harbor International Airport in Phoenix. And she's inside of her little tote. Now this picture was actually before she got loaded into the tote. This was the incubator that she was staying in. And you can see she had her mom with her. This was her stuffed animal mother who was with her. And her stuffed animal mother actually made the flight with her as well. She got loaded into this little tote. And this is just like a little air hole. You can see her mom up there that I took a picture of her through, where she's just resting and her cute little butt inside of that tote, just staying nice and safe inside of there. These are pictures that I had taken. So this was my point of view from that plane that I just showed you the picture of. That's the Sky Harbor International Airport on the ground. This is the city of Phoenix that we're flying over. Also taken from my point of view, I don't know exactly where we were at this point, but there was some angry clouds. This was like north of Phoenix somewhere. There were some angry clouds that we had to avoid in this teeny tiny little plane. I forget exactly how high we were flying at this point. I think we were only at like 14,000 feet or something like that. And I think planes normally, like your normal commuter plane is going to be at like 30,000 or whatever. I think we were at like 14, if I'm remembering correctly. I might be slightly off on that. This is Lake Mead. So when we were, again, flying on our way to Boise, Idaho, you can see Lake Mead down there. She took a nap on the trip, which is great. The best way to fly, just take a nap. Wake up till you get there. This is as we were getting close to Boise. So we went from hot to snow that was close by. And then we took her to the World Center for Birds of Prey. This is just a picture of their facility at for the Peregrine Fund. So when we got her there, we handed her over to the Peregrine Fund people. So again, this place has biologists working here who know the ins and outs of condor breeding, condor raising, and how to care for these babies. Again, the Peregrine Fund is one of the groups that really organizes the breeding of California condors and their release into the wild. This here is one of their little puppets that they use, where when they're feeding those really tiny babies, if they need to act as a surrogate parent, they can use this little puppet to actually feed the babies so that the babies don't get habituated to humans. So we, completed our journey of getting little Malagra up to the Peregrine Fund. And we were sad because she had been our little miracle baby that we had just taken in at first. Weren't sure if the egg was going to hatch, but hatched her out, had her going well for a week and then got her to where she needed to be. So we left her there with a lot of hope that she would do well. Of course, you never know what's going to happen, right? But it was really very heartwarming to get her there. And we were just very hopeful that she would make it because, again, we had just been through this pretty intense time of a lot of these birds passing away. And we needed a good story. So now the great news was when she got to the facility, her foster parents did accept her just fine. And I don't have any really pictures of the foster parents accepting her. There are some out there, but I don't have them. So these are pictures of her growing up because she stayed with her foster parents. And, they fed her, they accepted her, they fed her. And as she got bigger, then they start moving them out to be with the other condors because condors are very social. And so they have to, socialize in their flocks and figure out their dynamics. And so if you remember, her number was 1221. And they always put these tags on the birds to identify who is who. And so usually they put just like the last two numbers. Some of them are variable, but a lot of times it's just like the last two numbers of that long number that they have. And so she got the tag number 21. And there she is hanging out with, I don't know who 34 is. Maybe it was 1, 2, 3, 4. I have no idea. But there she is, just they're eating together. She's sunning in this. So here she is growing, this is a big baby now, but she's still a baby, right? Because she's got that black head. So she stayed at the facility, growing up, maturing, learning what she needs to be a condor in the wild. And after 16 months of her being at the facility and growing up there, it was time to get her out into the wild because, again, those birds are in that facility so that they're bred so they can be released into the wild. That is the end goal. Release is the end goal always. And so they had to decide where is she going to go because they divide these birds up to go to different places. There are so many important scientists that are monitoring what these birds are doing. They're monitoring their genetics. They're trying to figure out where they should put them to be most appropriate for the genetics of the birds. And we were very happy because it was decided that she would get to go home, which home was the Grand Canyon, right? That's where she was laid. So this is the day that she was actually loaded up into the van to get brought back to Arizona. So she's in one of these crates. There were other birds that were coming to Arizona as well. Now, where home is in the Grand Canyon is a portion called the Vermilion Cliffs. The Grand Canyon is quite vast, and there's a specific area, the Vermilion Cliffs, where they release these birds. And these are just some pictures of what it looks like. So these just nice, high, beautiful cliffs, and the birds, are typically up at the top of the cliffs and like sort of soaring around them. Again, just some really nice photos showing what the area looks like. Now, before she could be released, she did need to acclimate to the environment. She's been living in Idaho for the last 16 months, a little bit different weather in Idaho compared to northern Arizona. So they put them into a cage where they're on the edge of the cliff, essentially, and the cliff face. And so they're exposed to the elements up there, but it's safe. It's in an enclosed environment. They're just getting used to the sights, the sounds, the temperatures, which is the biggest thing in Arizona. And just acclimating in there for about a month or so. And the other thing that happened in this time frame, because we were dealing with this outbreak of influenza in these California condors, thankfully, the government did allow the condors to be vaccinated for high pathogenic avian influenza. And that is very unique and really, we're all really grateful that we were able to do that because in the US, we are not able to vaccinate birds against high pathogenic influenza. And part of that is because of how it affects like trade restrictions. Remember, this is a very big economic problem for the poultry industry. And that does affect how we do trade and everything with other countries. And so it may seem like some tiny little thing because, hey, we're just trying to help the California condor, but it actually has really pretty wide effects, So a lot of important people behind the scenes were able to make it work to where the US government allowed us to vaccinate the California condors. So we have been vaccinating them for high pathogenic avian influenza. And she was amongst one of the lucky ones who's able to be vaccinated. So we actually went up to the Vermilion Cliffs to the site where she was to vaccinate her prior to being released. So this is a team of us, some Peregrine Fund workers and Liberty Wildlife people, myself, walking along this very sandy area at the top of those cliffs to hike out to that cage area where they were to do their vaccinations. Now, when we went to, as we're approaching that area, we were actually told that, there's usually some visitors to the pen, and the visitors are the other condors that are out there. Right, because this is where these birds have been released. So they will fly quite far, but they also will kind of come back and stay around this territory as well. And so you can see the cage here off the side of the cliff, that cage where this is where the young individuals are staying. So Malagar's in here along with a few other individuals getting acclimated. And you can see these little black dots kind of on the top of the cage. And as we zoom in and get closer, you can see them a little bit better. And it turns out that those are all condors that are hanging out on the top of the cage. Now, what was really, I think, fun and nice to see was this individual who's over here, kind of off to the side. This actually is her father. So remember that her father was out there still. He was incubating her. Once the egg was taken, he did leave the nesting site, but he survived through the whole thing. He survived through the influenza outbreak. And actually here he is on this cage. She's in there, and that's her father right on the end hanging out. So that was very neat to see that her father is there. It's like he's visiting with her. Of course, we don't know, but that's something that we would love to think. So we went out there, we vaccinated her, and then we went back. And then about a week later, we went back to the Vermilion Cliffs for the actual release date, because you want to vaccinate them first and give them a little bit of time before you release them. Like, you don't want to vaccinate and then release necessarily if you can avoid something like that. Just because what if there is a potential vaccine reaction, even though the birds have been doing pretty well with the vaccine, we have to be cautious, and it's still such a new thing that we're doing. Every bird is being monitored. So, release day comes, and on release day, there's lots of people. I think they had said it was maybe around 500 or so that actually had gone out on release day. So people come from, Arizona or Utah or California or other states too, for these releases of these birds. And so everybody's kind of out in this little like pasture area, I guess you could call it, or I don't know that it's called pasture. I don't know, this flat area in front of the Vermilion Cliffs. And actually, like right up at the top here, like about where I have the little arrow pointing approximately, is actually where that catch cage was. So, a week prior, we are up there at the catch cage. Now, a week later, we're down on the ground and looking up at that cage for the birds to be released. So here's some of the people hanging out, ready to just watch the birds be released. You got all these great scopes that are allowing us to visualize the birds being released. This is one of the individuals, Tim, who is with the Peregrine Fund, who was just sort of speaking for the event and telling us what was going on, because again, it's not just Malagra who's getting released that day. There were other birds that were getting released that day too, and just talking about how important the program is, and what it means to everybody to have the ability to release these birds. This photo is actually taken through one of those spotting scopes. So all these like little scopes that are lined up here. If you put your cell phone up against them, you can sometimes get some good pictures. And this is the actual cage from the other angle where the birds are going to be released from. So, they start releasing the birds, or they open the cage, and it's not like they like throw the birds out. That's definitely not what's happening. All they do is they open the door, and the birds get to decide when they want to leave. And so you never know what's going to happen, because maybe the birds aren't going to leave. Maybe they're like, hey, this cage is really cool, and we're just going to hang out inside of here, and hours later we'll leave. Who knows? So birds do eventually, though. Someone gets brave and someone's like, I'm gonna go figure this out. And this is going to be like the first really big flight that they've had, right? Because they've been flying inside of the pens, but it's not like they've been soaring inside of the pen. So this is the first day that these birds ever get to soar, which is pretty amazing. And so this photo, I know it's just like a picture of the sky. I don't have the best photos because I'm not the best photographer, so I apologize. But I think you guys already know that about me. But you see this little black dot here, and these like couple little black dots here. So these were birds that they're coming out of the cage, and they're getting released, and they're taking off, and they're soaring. Now, other birds that are the ones that are already out there, so some of those birds who are like sitting on the cage, they just start soaring with them, so they see one release and they're like, oh, I'm gonna go off too. And so I think in this photo, this is only like the one that's sort of closest. That is one of the birds that was actually released that day. So it's first, big soaring that's ever done. And then these other two little dots are other individuals who've been out there for quite some time. Now, Malagra, when we're waiting for her to come out, and at that point, like from the time that they had opened the door to the time that she finally decided to come out, it was almost 2 hours, I think. But when she came out, she didn't want to soar. So what she did instead is she hopped out and she just jumped up to the top of the cage. And so I just have two pictures. They're essentially the same thing. She was just hanging out on the top of the cage. And so we're all excited that she's out, but she's not flying. So she's just like, I'm gonna hang out here for a while and probably just take in all the sights before taking off. She did eventually fly. While we're at this with all these other people who are watching the birds, they were raffling off the tags, because the birds, when they're in the facilities, they have their original tags, but then they get new fresh tags before they get released. And so they actually raffled off the birds' tags from when they're babies in the facility, just as a way to, get funds for the Peregrine Fund, because this is something where they need help, they need funds, they need support to support these birds and do what they're doing and continue the program. And so her tag was raffled off. Some of the people who are from Liberty Wildlife did enter into the raffle in an attempt to get her tag, and didn't get it. Their numbers were not called with the raffle. But the person who did win the raffle, one of the people from Liberty Wildlife went up to them and was like, "Hey, I know you won that raffle there," but told them how important the bird was to us and how important the tag was and everything. And that individual was extremely generous and thoughtful, and actually then turned around and gave the tag for Malagra to Liberty Wildlife as something for us to remember all the efforts that were put into taking care of her and her journey and everything. So Liberty Wildlife did end up getting that tag. We're super grateful to the person who won it and then gave it to us. So that was really nice. Now we did end up leaving for the day, and when we were heading home, we got a little bit more news, because one of the people who has been with us along this whole journey is actually a photographer who wrote or was part of an article about Malagra, about this bird, for Audubon. And actually Audubon did publish this story, not the full story, because this full story only just what I'm telling you guys only just came to fruition in the last month. Like, her release was literally the end of September. But Audubon, after, when we sent her up to the Peregrine Fund, the photographer Karen was with us, and she was taking photos and everything. So she came, and Audubon made a story about her. So there's actually a September 23, I think, issue. I think it's a September 23 issue, or the autumn issue, or something like that, of Audubon, that this story is in, and she's actually on the cover of the story as a baby. So if you want to see more photos of Malagra, you can get access to that article and see more of Malagra as a baby and everything. But anyways, that photographer came back to take photos of her, to sort of get more of the story, to hopefully have more of the story to be released in another Audubon. That's like an update of, hey, what happened with that bird? Let's find out. And she stayed behind, and she was watching. And as she's taking photos of Malagra, what was amazing, one more final great thing, was her dad, Malagra's dad, came back. And they met up again. And I don't have any of the amazing photos from that. I've seen it, but they're not my photos to share. So everybody, if you want to see them, you're going to have to wait until the Audubon article. But there's some really great pictures of Malagra with her father. And again, we don't know if they actually know each other, but we all hope that somehow they know each other. And who knows, maybe he knows it's his baby that he never got to see hatch, but he knew as an egg, and now he gets to see her back in the environment with him. So just a very nice little ending to her release. But one word of caution for the future. So Malagra and her friends still need help out there. because although we went through this pretty hard time with high pathogenic avian influenza, that's only one of the problems that condors have had to deal with, and that's not even the worst problem that condors have had to deal with. The biggest problem that condors have really had to deal with is lead toxicity in the environment, because remember that our condors are actually these scavenging birds, right? And so they're going to eat dead things. And so if they find dead animals of whatever source, they're going to eat them. And sometimes when people use lead to shoot an animal, for hunting purposes, and then they leave like fragments of or parts of the animal behind, like the pluck of the animal behind, there can potentially be lead fragments in those things. And then when the birds consume those parts of the animal, they could get lead, and they can get lead toxic. And lead toxicity is actually the main cause of death of California condors. I believe it's right around 60% of condor deaths are because of lead toxicity. And so we're finding it, really important to try to get the word out more and more about not using lead shot for hunting. It's not only for the birds' health, it's also for the environment's health, and it's for our own health too. This is just a nice little picture that it's not a condor, it's an eagle, but other animals are affected by it too, for sure. Eagles, swans, tons of birds out there will scavenge. And when I say swans, so not swans are scavenging dead animals. They're like finding lead shot things in water, what have you, from sinkers and stuff. So it leads into the environment in a variety of ways. But when we have any of our wild birds scavenging or other animals scavenging on these gut piles that might be left behind that could potentially have lead shot in them, animals can get it and become toxic and die from it. And it's just really sad because that's actually what we treat more condors for. And not just at Liberty Wildlife, like the Peregrine Fund actually treats a significant portion of them for lead toxicity. The other facilities in California and Oregon and Baja, all these places are treating these birds for lead toxicity. It's repeated, where it's actually coming up on lead season for us. In reality, there is a lead toxicity season. So that's usually starting in about November. So we haven't had any condors at Liberty Wildlife for a little bit, but we probably will be getting them in soon with lead toxicity. And so we just ask that people not use lead shot. You can use copper. There's alternative types of bullets that are safe for hunting for wildlife. But we really just want to diminish the impact that lead has on the California condor population and other populations too. So with that, I am really up to the end here. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, let's see if we have well, someone let's see. Oh, by the way, I did not realize that this presentation was going to be such a personal journey. Like, I am blown away, like how touching the story is. Seeing you on the plane, the little plane, like,
yeah.
and all that. It's such a great view that you just walked us through. I'm like blown away. Yeah, so thank you. And also, like, the number 21 is always going to have new meaning to me now. Like, I'm just always going to think of that Malagra when I see that number. Okay, let's see if we have time for some questions. Wow, what a great what some great insight. Okay, so someone wanted to ask, at what age is a condor considered an adult?
I believe right about 5-ish. And this is where my Liberty Wildlife people would be the better ones to answer.
You're like, they can chime in on the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's man, what a great story. Are you gonna go back out there and try to, bring your monoc there and see if you can spot the
Fine. Well, so they have radio transmission on them, so the biologists are out there and watching them. And actually, the guy, Tim, who I had the picture of, he had sent us a video of her flying maybe like a week or two ago. Just because, they are constantly monitoring them. So, there's a part of me that hopes the only way that I will see her again is out there and not in the facility.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
Hopefully
Okay.
I'll make it out there again to see her at some point.
Yeah. No, that was awesome. And also, like, just holding the egg is that a little nerve-wracking for you, even as an expert avian veterinarian?
Oh yeah.
Is
For
it?
sure. I mean, again, any endangered species, like you don't want to be the one to do something wrong, you know?
Yeah. I mean, eggs. I mean, I drop my own eggs here when I'm afflicted sometimes. I can't even imagine holding an egg under egg, under
Yeah.
eggs. Oh, that was amazing. Okay. Okay. I guess that's our time today. But again, I hope people share this webinar because it's such a fascinating look that we don't get. And that was amazing and great presentation and everything. Thank you. Um, wow. Okay. We got our winner of our giveaway today, the pumpkin spice Nutriberries, as well as another Lafeber product for your birds choosing. And that is going to McCall Deese. I hope I said your name correctly. That is going out to you. Um, and oh my gosh. Okay. That was awesome. By the way, I'm just blown away. And good for you going on that little airplane. I'd be terrified. So now, like, just to see the depths of what what goes in behind the scenes is just amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I hope people don't take that for granted because you guys are out there on the front line. I mean, Liberty, like all you guys, I'm amazed. It just makes a difference. So, wow. Um, okay, I have to announce what we're going to do next Friday. We're going to be on with another webinar next Friday with Pamela Clark. She's going to do part 2 of behavior misconceptions. Do I have a problem parrot? And put that in quotes, problem in quotes, because yeah, um, all right. So congratulations to our winner. Congratulations to Malagra. Someone says congrats to Malagra. I am right there. And her dad. And awesome presentation, Dr. Lamb. Once again, you nailed out the part. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. On that note, everybody, I'm going to wish you a wonderful weekend. All the best to you and your flock. Everyone stay safe. Till next time and keep doing good work. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.